Well, hello everybody. This is Brett, and welcome to my channel, and welcome to the reading of The Secret Terrorist, Chapter 2, President Andrew Jackson. And this book is by Bill Hughes. And it's been a couple busy weeks for me here, and I apologize to anybody out there who has missed my presence on the YouTube here. I'm dealing with the busiest time of year right now as I'm working my job as a carpenter, and I have very prudent people that I work with, so I like to keep busy, and so I apologize for having a little bit of inconsistency. I was hoping to do one of these a week, and that's obviously not happening at the moment. So I will say that past the busy season here, things will definitely free up for me, and I'll have more time to spend on these types of projects that I like to do. So let me continue, and I'll get right back to reading, and we'll start here, Chapter 2. President Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was elected to the presidency in the year 1828. His bravery and military skill in defeating the British in the War of 1812 are well known. He fought many battles in open combat, but now he was facing an entirely different enemy. This enemy claimed to be American just like him, claimed to want the best for America just like him, and occupied high positions of responsibility just like him. The Jesuits were going to destroy America as determined by the sinister councils at Vienna, Verona, and Cherry, and it was during the presidency of Andrew Jackson that they began to apply their treachery in full force. These Jesuits moved among the American people and looked just like Americans. They were, in fact, American citizens, but their loyalty was to the Pope of Rome. Their purposes were those of the papacy. These people were traitors and a serious threat to the continued existence of the United States. Quote, "A nation can survive its fools, even the ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within. An enemy at the gates is less formidable, for he is known and carries his banners openly against the city. But the traitor moves among those within the gates freely, his sly whispers rustling through all the alleys, heard in the very halls of government itself. For the traitor appears no traitor. He speaks in the accents familiar to his victims, and he wears their face and their garments, and he appeals to the baseness that lies deep in the hearts of all men. He rots the soul of a nation. He works secretly and unknown in the night to undermine the pillars of a city. He infects the body politic so that it can no longer resist." Marcus Ceriso speaking to Caesar. Unquote. Two of these traitors were John C. Calhoun and Nicholas Biddle. Andrew Jackson won the presidency in 1828 by a very wide margin. His vice president was John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. Calhoun realized that the love for freedom was very strong in the hearts of all Americans. He realized that slavery was rapidly being hemmed in because nearly all the territories purchased from Spain and France were made free. Without a continual expansion of slavery, it would eventually be defeated. In order to derail the current anti-slavery trends in America, Calhoun began a newspaper in Washington called the United States Telegraph. In this paper, he began to advocate the idea of states' rights. The doctrine of states' rights would lead inevitably to the complete abolishment of the United States. It presumed that a state had an inherent right to do whatever it wanted. Under the principle of state rights, if a state wanted to secede from the Union, it could do so. This would eventually eliminate the United States. Calhoun took a festering sore and turned it into the reason for the Southern states to secede from the Union. The festering sore was the high tariff placed on foreign imports, which made European goods more expensive. Since Europe bought large amounts of Southern cotton and other commodities, the tariff meant that Southern merchants had less money for their exports. This tax helped Northern manufacturers because now the Southern merchant would buy more from him. Calhoun convinced the Southern states that they were getting a very bad deal and that they had the right to leave the Union over this issue. Quote, the South, being an agricultural region, was easily convinced that a high tariff on foreign imports was injurious to them. He next undertook to explain to the South that these high duties were placed on specific articles and was done as special favor to protect local interests. Thus, he said to the people of the South, "You are being taxed to support Northern manufacturers." And it was this popular issue he planted his nullification flag. This new bastard democracy meant the right to destroy peaceably or by force, when ready, the federal union. John Smith Dye, The Adder's Den, unquote. Shortly after Calhoun started his paper, there was a meeting called to honor the memory of Thomas Jefferson. At this meeting, Andrew Jackson was asked to speak. He arose and declared, quote, "Our federal union, it must be preserved," unquote. After saying this, Jackson sat down. Calhoun then arose and declared, quote, "The Union next to our liberties most dear, may we all remember that it can be only preserved by respecting the rights of the states and distributing equally the benefits and burdens of the Union," unquote. Calhoun put the Union second to our liberties. The Union and the Constitution are what established our liberties. If the Union were dissolved, the states would be at each other's throats, just like the countries of Europe down through history. The resources of the states would be constantly used up, always preparing for war with each other. This was the objective of Calhoun and the papacy from the beginning. Their goal was to destroy the United States. Calhoun used the tariff to create friction between the North and the South. Congress could have easily changed the tariff, so that was no reason for secession. Many spoke out against his underhanded methods. Daniel Webster said, quote, "Sir, the world will scarcely believe that this whole controversy and all the desperate means which its support requires has no other foundation than a difference of opinion between a majority of the people of South Carolina on the one side and a vast majority of the people of the United States on the other. The world will not credit the fact. We who hear and see it can ourselves hardly yet believe it," unquote. Daniel Webster knew that the issue went far deeper than a tariff. Calhoun was the Jesuit plant being used to split America in two. John Quincy Adams in the House of Representatives declared, quote, "In opposition to the compromise of Mr. Clay, no victim is necessary, and yet you propose to bind us hand and foot, to pour out our blood upon the altar, to appease the unnatural discontent of the South, a discontent having deeper root than the tariff, and will continue when that is forgotten," unquote. Adams was correct in his observations. The tariff issue had died, but the smoldering embers of division had split America in half. The blood of the Civil War can be traced back to Jesuit John C. Calhoun. As we watch Calhoun seek to rend America in two, let us remember the words of ex-Catholic priest Charles Chiniquy. Quote, "Rome saw at once that the very existence of the United States was a formidable menace to her own life. From the very beginning, she perfidiously sowed the germs of division." Okay, let me start this over. My screen went blank. Quote, "Rome saw at once that the very existence of the United States was a formidable menace to her own life. From the very beginning, she perfidiously sowed the germs of division and hatred between the two great sections of this country, and succeeded in dividing South from North on the burning question of slavery. That division was her golden opportunity to crush one by the other and reign over the bloody ruins of both, a favored, long-standing policy." Charles Chiniquy, 50 Years in the Church of Rome, unquote. Calhoun was not a loyal citizen of the United States. He worked to advance the Pope's agenda. He seemed to be an American, but was really a Jesuit in the Pope's army in the effort to destroy America. Priest Phelan makes this statement, quote, "Why, if the government of the United States were at war with the Church, we would say tomorrow, to hell with the government of the United States. And if the Church and all the governments of the world were at war, we would say, to hell with all the governments of the world. Why is it the Pope has such tremendous power? Why the Pope is the ruler of the world? All the emperors, all the kings, all the princes, all the presidents of the world are as these altar boys of mine." Priest Phelan, Western Watchman, 1912, unquote. John C. Calhoun was one of the papal altar boys, doing as he was told. Andrew Jackson, in his message to Congress in 1832, stated this, quote, "The right of the people of a single state to absolve themselves at will and without the consent of the other states from their most solemn obligations, the hazard and the liberties and happiness of millions compromising this nation cannot be acknowledged. Such authority is believed to be wholly repugnant, both to the principles upon which the general government is constituted and the objects which it expressly formed to obtain," unquote. John Smith Dye, The Adder's Den. Jackson knew that Calhoun's plot was devised to destroy the United States. and its constitutional liberties. And this was unacceptable to him. Jackson was standing in the way of the Congress of Vienna, Verona, and Cherry, and the Jesuits had to deal with him. Nicholas Biddle, another one of their agents, the Jesuits that is, carried out phase 2 of the Jesuit attack. Biddle was a brilliant financier, having graduated from the University of Pennsylvania at the age of 13. He was a master of the science of money. By the time Jackson came to the presidency in 1828, Biddle was in full control of the federal government's central bank. This was not the first time that a central bank had been established. Twice before, under Robert Morris and then under Alexander Hamilton, had a central bank been tried, but in both cases it failed because of fraudulent actions on the part of the bankers who were in control. After the War of 1812, a central bank was tried again, and it was excuse me, in this third attempt that we find Mr. Biddle. Who was behind Nicholas Biddle and the attempt to have a central bank in the United States? Quote, "The blunt reality is that the Rothschild banking dynasty in Europe was the dominant force both financially and politically in the formation of the Bank of the United States," unquote. G. Edward Griffin, The Creature from Jekyll Island. Over the years, N.M. Rothschild, the Manchester textile manufacturer, had bought cotton from the southern states. The Rothschilds had developed heavy American commitments. Nathan had made loans to various states of the Union, had been for a long time the official European banker for the U.S. government, and was a pledged supporter of the Bank of the United States, unquote. Derek Wilson, Rothschild, The Wealth and Power of a Dynasty. Quote, "The Rothschilds had a long, powerful influence in dictating American financial laws. The law records show that they were the power in the old Bank of the United States," unquote. Gustavus Myers, History of the Great American Fortunes. The investigators behind Biddle in his efforts to establish the central bank were the Rothschilds. For whom was the Rothschild family working? Quote, "Aware that the Rothschilds are an important Jewish family, I looked them up in the Encyclopedia Judaica and discovered they bear the title Guardians of the Vatican Treasury. The appointment of Rothschild gave the Black Papacy absolute financial privacy and secrecy. Who would ever search a family of Orthodox Jews for the key to the wealth of the Roman Catholic Church?" Unquote. F. Tupper Saucy, Rulers of Evil. The Rothschilds were Jesuits who used their Jewish background as a facade to cover their sinister activities. The Jesuits, working through Rothschild and Biddle, sought to gain control of the banking system of the United States. Andrew Jackson was not happy with the central bank. When Biddle sought to renew the bank's charter in 1832, President Jackson put his re-election bid on the line and vetoed Congress' attempt to renew the charter. He vetoed it for 3 reasons. The bank was becoming a monopoly, it was unconstitutional, and it was a grave danger to the country by having the bank heavily dominated by foreign interests, the Jesuits. Jackson felt that the very security of America was in danger from these foreign interests. He said, quote, "Is there no danger to our liberty and independence in a bank that is in its nature and has so little to bind it to our country? Is there not cause to tremble for the purity of our elections in peace and for the independence of our country in war? Controlling our currency, receiving our public monies, and holding thousands of our citizens in dependence, it would be more formidable and dangerous than a naval and military power of the enemy," unquote. Herman E. Cross, Documentary and History of Banking and Currency in the United States. Jackson's comments were nothing new. Others understood the power wielded by those who ran the bank. Meyer Rothschild said, quote, "Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws," unquote. G. Edward Griffin, The Creature from Jekyll Island. This is the Jesuits / Rothschild's golden rule. The one who has the gold makes the rules. Griffin then writes, quote, "The Rothschild dynasty had conquered the whole..." Quote, "The Rothschild dynasty had conquered the world more thoroughly, more cunningly, and much more lastingly than all the Caesars before or all the Hitlers after them," unquote. Thomas Jefferson had this to say about the central bank, quote, "A private central bank issuing the public currency is a greater menace to the liberties of the people than a standing army. We must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt," unquote. The Jesuits used Biddle and Rothschild to gain the upper hand in American banking because they knew that they could and then control the people and effectively rewrite the Constitution according to papal law. Jackson was trying to stop them. Let us take a closer look at the central bank and see why it is so dangerous. Most people do not understand the central bank and the Federal Reserve Bank. There is a very simplified scenario that pretty much explains one of the operations of the Federal Reserve. It is necessary to understand that the Federal Reserve Bank is not owned by the United States government, as many believe. The central bank, the Federal Reserve Bank, is a private bank owned by some of the richest and most powerful people in the world. This bank has nothing to do with the United States government other than the connection which allows the operation described below. The Federal Reserve Bank has a total government-enforced monopoly in money. Before we had the central bank, each individual bank competed with other banks. The customers, the consumers, got the best deal. Not anymore. We all know that today the United States government borrows money and operates under astronomical debt. Why is this? Common sense dictates that a policy of such enormous debt will sooner or later destroy the organization that practices it, because the interest on its debt must increase beyond its income, making payoff impossible. Now, to our scenario. Here, roughly, is how the operation proceeds. Suppose the United States government wants to borrow $1 billion. The government issues a bond for this amount. much as a water company does when it wants to raise money for a new pipeline or a new dam. The government delivers this bond for $1 billion to the Federal Reserve Bank. The Federal Reserve Bank takes the bond and writes an order to the Department of Printing and Engraving to print the $1 billion worth of bills. After about 2 weeks or so, when the bills are printed, the Department of Printing and Engraving ships the bills to the Federal Reserve Bank, which then writes a check for about $2,000 to pay for printing the $1 billion worth of bills. The Federal Reserve Bank then takes the $1 billion and lends the $1 billion to the United States government, and the people of the country pay interest at an exorbitant rate each year on this money, which came out of nothing. The owners of the Federal Reserve Bank put up nothing for this money. We see, therefore, that when the United States government goes into debt $1, a dollar plus the interest goes into the pockets of the owners of the Federal Reserve Bank. This is the largest, the most colossal theft ever perpetrated in the history of mankind, and it is so slick, so subtle, so obfuscated that propaganda from the news media that the victims are not even aware of what is happening. You can see why the Jesuits want to keep this operation secret. The Constitution of the United States gives to Congress the power to coin money. If Congress coined its own money, as the Constitution directs, it would not have to pay the hundreds of billions of dollars of interest that it now pays each year to the bankers for the national debt, for money that came out of nothing. Money coined by Congress would be debt-free. Biddle responded to Jackson's refusing to allow him to reestablish the central bank by shrinking the nation's money supply. He did this by refusing to make loans. By doing so, he upended the economy and money disappeared. Unemployment ran high. Companies went bankrupt because they could not pay their loans. The nation went into a panic depression. Biddle felt he could force Jackson to keep the central bank. So confident was he that he publicly boasted that he had caused the economic woes in America. Due to his foolish bragging, others came out in defense of Jackson, and the central bank died. It died until its reestablishment in 1913. It was reestablished then by the same people, Jesuits of Rome, for the same purpose of bringing America to her knees and planting the temporal power of the Pope in America. The Jesuits' scheming for a central bank in America was temporarily stopped during Andrew Jackson's presidency. He had opposed Calhoun's states' rights doctrine, and he stopped Biddle's attempt to continue the central bank. When other things fail, the Jesuit oath declares that it is commendable to murder someone who stands in their way. Quote, the president had earned the underlying hatred of the monetary scientists, both in America and abroad. The Jesuits were furious. It is not surprising, therefore, that on January 30, 1835, an assassination attempt was made against him. Miraculously, both pistols of the assailant misfired, and Jackson was spared by a quirk of fate. It was the first such attempt to be made against the life of a president in the United States. The would-be assassin was Richard Lawrence, who either was truly insane or who pretended to be insane to escape harsh punishment. At any rate, Lawrence was found not guilty due to insanity. Later, he boasted to friends that he had been in touch with powerful people in Europe who had promised to protect him from punishment should he be caught, unquote. The Jesuit order was dead serious about taking over the United States. They infiltrated into government at the highest levels and used their agents in controlling the American banking system. They would also use assassination when necessary to destroy any opposition to their plans. Andrew Jackson was almost assassinated by a Jesuit plant who bragged of powerful Europeans, the Jesuits, that would set him free in case he was caught. Other presidents came along who also incurred the undying wrath of Rome. Several have been assassinated, and a few escaped certain death. The next chapter, which discusses the presidencies of William Henry Harrison, Zachary Taylor, and James Buchanan, will fill in the details. And this ends chapter 2 of The Secret Terrorists, President Andrew Jackson. And I thank you for listening, and I'll look forward to doing another chapter very soon. And I wish you all a blessed day, and I'll catch up with you soon. Bye-bye.